Sofia Mendes didn't know that collapsing outside those iron gates would be the best mistake of her life. She didn't know the man who found her in the rain owned half the city's underground empire. She didn't know that Adriano Rossi, the most feared name in the criminal underworld, would carry her inside his mansion with a tenderness no one thought him capable of. And she certainly didn't know that the moment his dark eyes met hers, everything she thought she knew about survival, about trust, about love, would shatter and rebuild itself into something entirely new. One question lingered as she woke in silk sheets that cost more than her yearly rent. Could a woman running from her past find sanctuary in the arms of a man who dealt in violence and power? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The storm had been building all evening, but Sofia Mendes barely noticed. Her mind was too fractured, too consumed by the desperate need to put distance between herself and the apartment she'd shared with Marcus for 2 years. 2 years of walking on eggshells, of learning to read his moods like a survival manual, of becoming smaller and quieter until she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Tonight had been the final straw. When he'd grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks and told her she wasn't going anywhere, that she belonged to him, something inside her had finally snapped. She'd waited until he passed out drunk on the couch, then grabbed her phone, her wallet, and the coat on her back, before slipping out into the night. Now, 3 hours later, she was thoroughly lost in a part of the city she didn't recognize. The rain had started as a drizzle, but quickly escalated into a deluge that soaked through her thin jacket within minutes. Her phone had died an hour ago, and she had no idea which direction would take her back to familiar streets. Every corner looked the same in the darkness, every streetlight casting shadows that made her flinch and walk faster. She'd left behind her charger, her identification, everything but the desperate need to be anywhere but there. Sofia's legs ached with exhaustion. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was long gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that made each step feel like wading through concrete. The neighborhoods had gradually changed as she walked, the buildings growing larger and more imposing, the streets cleaner and more manicured. She was in the wealthy district now, where iron gates protected sprawling estates and security cameras tracked every movement. Not the place for someone like her, bedraggled and desperate, but she was too tired to care about appearances anymore. The world tilted suddenly, and Sofia realized she'd stopped walking. Her vision blurred at the edges, dark spots dancing in her peripheral vision. When was the last time she'd actually taken care of herself? Marcus had controlled everything, the money, the food, even when she was allowed to sleep. She'd been running on empty for so long that she'd forgotten what full felt like. The rain hammered down harder, each drop feeling like a tiny stone against her skin. Her knees buckled, and she reached out blindly for something to steady herself against. Her palm met cold iron bars. Through the haze of exhaustion and rain, she could make out massive gates in front of her, the kind that cost more than most people's cars. Beyond them, a long driveway disappeared into darkness, leading to what she assumed was yet another mansion for yet another person who would look right through someone like her. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was literally on the outside looking in, collapsed against the barrier between two different worlds. Her fingers slipped on the wet metal as her legs finally gave out completely. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was the sensation of falling and the oddly comforting sound of rain on stone. Adriano Rossi was reviewing shipping manifests in his study when Giuseppe, his head of security, knocked on the door with an urgency that immediately put him on alert. In Adriano's world, urgency usually meant blood, betrayal, or both. He closed the leather folder on his desk and gestured for Giuseppe to enter, his expression carefully neutral, even as his mind rapidly cycled through potential threats. Had the Morettis finally made their move? Had one of his own people turned? Boss. There's a situation at the front gate, Giuseppe said. His weathered face creased with an emotion Adriano couldn't quite identify. Not alarm, not concern for safety, but something softer. The cameras picked up someone approaching about 15 minutes ago, a woman. She collapsed right outside. Adriano's jaw tightened. And you're telling me this, why? Call an ambulance and be done with it. He had no patience for complications tonight. Not when the Santoro deal was still unresolved. and Antonio's men were getting restless. The last thing he needed was some drunk or addict creating problems on his property. I would have, but Giuseppe hesitated, which was unlike him. The man had worked for the Rossi family for 30 years and had seen things that would break most people. You should see for yourself. Something about this doesn't feel right. She doesn't look like she's drunk or using. She looks like she's running from something. Adriano stood, already reaching for his suit jacket. He'd learned long ago to trust Giuseppe's instincts. The man had saved his life more than once with that sixth sense for danger. They moved through the mansion's halls quickly, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Past artwork worth more than some country's GDP, past the life Adriano had built with blood and calculated ruthlessness. The security room was in the East Wing, a state-of-the-art setup that would make most government agencies jealous. The monitor showed a figure crumpled at the base of the gates, barely visible through the rain. Giuseppe zoomed in, and Adriano found himself leaning closer to the screen. Even in the grainy night vision footage, he could see she was young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair plastered to her face and clothes that suggested she'd been walking for hours. But it was something about the way she'd fallen that caught his attention, not the dramatic sprawl of someone seeking attention or the loose collapse of intoxication. She'd gone down like someone whose body had simply stopped cooperating, like a puppet with cut strings. "How long has she been there?" Adriano asked, his voice carefully controlled. He'd built his empire on the principle of not getting involved in things that didn't concern him, on maintaining distance between himself and the chaos of other people's lives. Yet something about this woman pulled at a part of him he'd thought long dead. The part that remembered being young and desperate himself, before power had made him untouchable. Maybe 10 minutes now. She hasn't moved. Giuseppe met his eyes with an expression that said he knew exactly what he was asking. "Your call, boss." Adriano made the decision before he could talk himself out of it. "Open the gates. I'll bring her in." He ignored Giuseppe's barely concealed surprise. "And have Dr. Castellano come immediately. Not a hospital here. Understood?" The fewer people who knew about this, the better. In his world, vulnerability was currency, and he'd just decided to spend some for a complete stranger. The rain was colder than he'd expected when he stepped outside, the kind of biting cold that seeped into bones and reminded him why he'd had heated walkways installed last year. His shoes, Italian leather worth more than most people's monthly rent, were ruined within seconds, but he barely noticed. He moved quickly down the driveway toward the gates, which were already sliding open with a mechanical hum. Giuseppe was right behind him with an umbrella, but Adriano waved him off. Too late for that now. She was smaller than she'd looked on the camera, curled on her side with one arm stretched toward the gate, as if she'd been trying to hold on when she fell. Adriano crouched beside her, noting the bluish tint to her lips. The violent shivering that shook her frame even unconscious. Hypothermia, probably. He checked for a pulse at her neck and found it, thready but present. No visible injuries that he could see, no blood, no obvious signs of assault beyond the wrist that showed dark bruising when her sleeve rode up. Finger marks. Someone had grabbed her, hard. Something dark and familiar stirred in his chest, an old anger he usually kept locked away. He knew those kinds of bruises, knew what kind of man left them. His father had been that kind of man before Adriano had grown strong enough to fight back. He'd sworn he'd never become that, even as he'd built an empire that required him to do terrible things. There were lines he didn't cross, and hurting women was carved in stone at the top of that list. "Let's get her inside," he said to Giuseppe, already sliding his arms under her shoulders and knees. She was lighter than he'd expected, far too light, and he could feel her bones through the wet fabric of her clothes. When was the last time this woman had eaten properly? He lifted her carefully, cradling her against his chest as he stood. Her head lolled against his shoulder, dark hair leaving wet trails on his white shirt, and he found himself adjusting his grip to support her more securely. Giuseppe stayed close as they walked back toward the mansion, the umbrella now doing its job of keeping the worst of the rain off them both. The warmth inside was shocking after the cold outside, and Adriano moved quickly through the entrance hall toward the East Wing guest suite. It was the most private room in the house, far from the main living areas where staff and associates might wander. Rosa, his housekeeper, appeared as if summoned by telepathy. her eyes widening at the sight of the unconscious woman in his arms. Before she could ask questions, he gave orders: hot bath, warm clothes, and fresh linens in the East Suite. Now, Dr. Castellano is on his way. He laid her carefully on the bed, which Rosa had already turned down, and stepped back to assess. She was still shivering, still unconscious, and her skin had an unhealthy pallor that worried him more than he wanted to admit. This was insane. He should have called an ambulance like a normal person. But he hadn't become one of the most powerful men in the city by doing what normal people did. And something told him this woman needed protection as much as she needed medical care. Those bruises on her wrist told a story, and he'd read enough of those stories in his life to know how they usually ended. Dr. Castellano arrived within 20 minutes, his medical bag in hand and his expression professionally neutral. Paolo Castellano had been on the Rossi payroll for 15 years, patching up bullet wounds and asking no questions that might get him killed. He examined the woman quickly, his hands gentle and efficient as he checked her vitals and assessed her condition. Adriano found himself watching closely, tension coiling in his shoulders until Paolo finally looked up. Hypothermia, dehydration, and severe exhaustion, Paolo said, pulling off his stethoscope. She needs warmth, fluids, and rest. The bruising on her wrist is a few hours old, defensive in nature. I'd say someone grabbed her and she pulled away. He met Adriano's eyes with the frankness of someone who'd seen too much to be shocked by anything. She's been neglecting herself for a while, malnourished, probably stressed beyond normal limits. Her body just shut down. Will she be all right? The question came out more intense than Adriano had intended, and he saw Paolo's eyebrows rise slightly. With proper care, yes, but she needs to stay warm and hydrated. I'll start an IV for fluids. She should wake up within a few hours. Paolo began preparing the IV, his movements practiced and sure. You want to tell me why you're playing Good Samaritan? Not exactly your usual style, if you don't mind me saying. Adriano didn't answer, because he didn't have a good answer. Instead, he watched as Rosa returned with warmed blankets and began the process of getting the woman out of her wet clothes and into something dry. He turned away to give her privacy, staring out the window at the storm still raging outside. What was he doing? He'd built his life on careful calculation, on never acting on impulse, on maintaining control in all situations. Yet he'd brought a complete stranger into his home, into his inner sanctum, based on nothing more than a feeling. She's decent, Rosa said softly, and Adriano turned back. The woman looked even smaller in Rosa's borrowed nightgown, swallowed by fabric and blankets. Paolo had finished with the IV and was packing up his bag. I'll check back in a few hours, the doctor said. Call me immediately if she develops a fever or doesn't wake up by morning. And Adriano? He paused at the door. Whatever reason you have for bringing her here instead of a hospital, make sure it's worth the risk. Strange women have a way of becoming complicated problems. After Paolo and Rosa left, Adriano pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, something he hadn't planned to do. He should go back to his study, back to the manifests and the never-ending logistics of running an empire built on controlled chaos. But he found himself unable to leave, drawn by a compulsion he didn't fully understand. He studied her face in the soft lamplight, noting the delicate bone structure, the dark lashes against pale cheeks, the full lips that even unconscious held a hint of stubbornness. She was beautiful, he realized, in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or artifice. Raw and real and utterly defenseless. Who was she? What had she been running from? And why did he care so much? The rain continued its assault on the windows as Adriano Rossi kept watch over a stranger, his empire temporarily forgotten in favor of a mystery he hadn't asked for, but found himself unwilling to surrender. The clock ticked toward midnight, and somewhere in the mansion's depths, life continued as normal. But in this room, something had shifted, something neither of them could have anticipated or prepared for. Fate had a sense of humor, Adriano thought, bringing this woman to his gates on a night when he could have been anywhere else, when Giuseppe could have made the call himself, when he could have stayed detached and uninvolved. But he hadn't, and as he watched the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the color slowly returning to her cheeks, Adriano knew with absolute certainty that his life had just become infinitely more complicated. He dealt with rival families, with corrupt politicians, with men who would kill him for the contents of his wallet. But something told him this woman, this stranger who'd collapsed outside his gates in the rain, would prove more dangerous to the careful walls he'd built around his heart than any enemy he'd ever faced. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt oddly like coming home. Sofia woke slowly, awareness returning in pieces like a puzzle assembling itself in her mind. Softness beneath her, warmth surrounding her, the faint scent of something expensive and masculine in the air. Her eyelids felt heavy, reluctant to open, but she forced them up anyway. Years of Marcus's unpredictability having trained her to always assess her situation immediately upon waking. What she saw made no sense. This wasn't Marcus's apartment with its stained carpet and walls that seemed to close in on her. This wasn't any place she recognized at all. The ceiling above her was ornate, decorated with subtle crown molding that probably cost more than her car. The bed she lay in was massive, covered in linens so soft they felt like clouds against her skin. Heavy curtains framed windows that showed early morning light filtering through expensive fabric. Everything about the room screamed wealth and taste, from the antique furniture to the artwork on the walls to the fresh flowers on the nightstand that someone had clearly placed there recently. Panic began to rise in her chest, her breath coming faster as she tried to piece together how she'd gotten here. She remembered leaving Marcus's apartment, walking in the rain, the exhaustion that had made her legs feel like lead. She remembered iron gates and falling, the world tilting sideways as her body finally gave up. After that, nothing. Just darkness and occasionally the sense of voices speaking above her, gentle hands tending to her, warmth gradually replacing the bone-deep cold. How long had she been unconscious? Hours? Days? And whose house was this? "You're awake." The voice came from her left, deep and measured, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe? Sofia's head snapped toward the sound, and she found herself staring at a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. If fashion magazines featured dangerous men who radiated power like other people radiated body heat. He sat in a chair beside the bed, perfectly still, watching her with eyes so dark they were almost black. His suit probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, tailored to perfection across broad shoulders and a lean frame. His face was all sharp angles and controlled intensity, handsome in a way that made her forget to breathe, with a jawline that could cut glass and lips that held no hint of softness. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. They were studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, cataloging every detail of her face with the focus of someone used to reading people for survival. Yet beneath the intensity, she saw something unexpected. Concern, real, genuine concern, that softened the hardness of his features and made him seem almost human rather than the marble statue he resembled. "Where am I?" Sofia's voice came out hoarse, and she winced at how weak she sounded. "Who are you?" She tried to sit up, and pain immediately lanced through her head, making the room spin. The man was out of his chair in an instant, one hand hovering near her shoulder as if to steady her but not quite touching, respecting her space in a way that surprised her. "Easy," he said, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. "You've been through an ordeal. I'm Adriano Rossi, and you're in my home. You collapsed outside my gates last night during the storm. My security found you and I brought you inside. You were hypothermic and severely dehydrated." He settled back into his chair but remained close, his body language open and non-threatening. "Dr. Castellano treated you. You've been unconscious for about 12 hours. Sofia's mind raced, trying to process this information. She'd passed out on a stranger's property, and instead of calling an ambulance, he'd brought her into his home? None of this made sense. People didn't do that. Especially not people who lived in places like this. Unless the paranoia that Marcus had cultivated in her over 2 years reared its ugly head. Was this some kind of trap, some elaborate scheme? But what would be the point? She had nothing worth stealing, no family to demand ransom from, no value whatsoever to someone who clearly had more money than God. Why? The question came out before she could stop it. Why would you help me? You don't know me. She watched his face carefully, looking for the tells that Marcus had taught her to watch for, the signs that preceded anger or violence. But Adriano's expression softened with understanding. Then don't trust me yet. Stay anyway. Let me prove that not all men are like the one who hurt you. No expectations, no pressure, just time and space to heal. He gestured back toward the mansion. I have 12 guest rooms. You can have anyone you want. Rosa will take care of you, and I'll keep my distance if that's what you need. But please, don't go back out there alone when you don't have to. Sofia felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the kindness she didn't know how to accept. What if I can never leave? What if I get too comfortable here and forget how to take care of myself? The question revealed more than she'd intended, exposing the core fear that Marcus had planted deep in her psyche, that she was fundamentally incapable of surviving on her own. Then you stay, Adriano said simply. And while you're here, I'll help you remember how strong you actually are. You walked through a storm for hours, Sofia. You escaped a situation that many people never find the courage to leave. You survived. That takes incredible strength. He smiled, and it reached his eyes this time, crinkling the corners in a way that made him look almost boyish. Besides, Rosa has already adopted you. If you leave now, she'll never forgive me. Despite everything, Sofia found herself laughing. A real laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside. It felt foreign and wonderful at the same time. Okay, she said, the decision settling into her bones with surprising certainty. I'll stay. But I need to contribute somehow. I can't just live here like some charity case. Let me help Rosa, or work in the garden, or something, anything. Deal, Adriano agreed immediately. Rosa will be thrilled to have help. She's been complaining about the roses for weeks. He offered her his arm, a courtly gesture that seemed at odds with the dangerous man he claimed to be. Now let me show you the rest of the gardens. There's a greenhouse in the back that I think you'll love. They spent the rest of the morning walking through Adriano's estate, and Sofia felt something inside her begin to unfurl, a tightly closed bud finally allowing itself to open toward the sun. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if she could really trust this feeling of safety, but for the first time in 2 years, she felt like maybe she had a choice. Maybe she could decide her own path forward. And maybe, just maybe, that path included the complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle man walking beside her. The days turned into weeks, and Sofia found herself settling into a routine that felt almost normal. She spent her mornings helping Rosa with household tasks, learning to cook meals that didn't come from boxes, discovering a talent for arranging flowers that made the housekeeper beam with pride. Afternoons were for the garden, where she worked alongside the groundskeeper, a quiet man named Paolo, who taught her about plants and soil and the patience required to make things grow. Evenings were often spent in Adriano's library, reading or occasionally watching him work, the scratch of his pen on paper a soothing background noise. Adriano was true to his word about keeping distance, but Sofia found herself seeking him out more and more. They fell into patterns of conversation over dinner, debates about books and philosophy that sometimes stretched late into the night. He was brilliant and well-read, able to discuss topics ranging from classical literature to modern politics with equal expertise. But he was also funny, with a dry wit that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years. She learned that he played piano, though he claimed to be rusty, and that he had a weakness for old noir films that they sometimes watched together in the mansion's private theater. But there were parts of his life that remained close to her, boundaries he maintained with polite but firm deflection. The men who came for meetings in his study, their conversations conducted in low voices behind closed doors, the phone calls he took that made his expression go cold and hard, transforming him from the man she knew into someone she could barely recognize. The nights when he came home late with tension in his shoulders and shadows in his eyes, disappearing into his study for hours. Sofia knew better than to ask, understood instinctively that there were aspects of Adriano's world that were better left unknown. But it created a strange duality in their relationship, intimacy mixed with careful distance, trust layered over secrets. One evening, about 6 weeks after Sofia had arrived, everything shifted. She'd been in the library, curled up in her favorite chair with a novel, when raised voices from Adriano's study drew her attention. It was unusual. Adriano was always controlled, always calm, but the anger in his voice now was palpable even through the heavy door. She shouldn't eavesdrop, she knew that, but curiosity and concern drove her closer. "I don't care what Moretti wants," Adriano was saying, his voice sharp as broken glass. "He crossed a line when he touched those girls. There are rules, Giuseppe. Even in our world, there are rules." A pause then. "Then he deals with the consequences. Set up a meeting. Make it clear this is not a negotiation." Sofia stepped back quickly as footsteps approached the door, pretending to be absorbed in her book as Giuseppe emerged, his weathered face grim. He nodded to her politely before leaving, and Sofia forced herself to stay seated, even as everything in her wanted to run to Adriano, to ask what was wrong, to help somehow. But this was the other side of him, the one she'd known existed but had been carefully shielded from. The dangerous man who dealt in violence and power, who made decisions that probably kept her awake at night if she let herself think too hard about them. She was about to retreat upstairs when Adriano appeared in the doorway of his study. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual, his tie loosened and his normally perfect hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. When he saw her, something in his expression softened, the hardness receding like a tide going out. "Sofia," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I didn't know you were still up." "I couldn't sleep," she said, which was true enough. "Are you okay?" The question was out before she could stop it, before she could remember that she was supposed to maintain distance, supposed to protect herself from getting too involved. Adriano laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No," he said with brutal honesty. "I'm not, but I will be." He moved into the library, heading straight for the bar in the corner and pouring himself 3 fingers of whiskey. He downed half of it in one swallow, and Sofia watched with concern. She'd never seen him drink like this, never seen him so visibly affected by whatever was happening in his world. "Do you want to talk about it?" she offered, setting her book aside. She didn't know if he'd accept, didn't know if he'd let her into that part of his life, but she had to try. Over the past weeks, Adriano had given her so much, safety and kindness and a place to heal. She wanted to give something back, wanted to be there for him the way he'd been there for her. Adriano looked at her for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. "I don't want to taint you with the things I deal with," he said finally. "You've been through enough darkness. You don't need mine too." Sofia stood and crossed to him, surprising them both with her boldness. She took the whiskey glass from his hand and set it on the bar, then reached up and loosened his tie completely, tossing it aside. "Tell me," she said firmly. "Stop trying to protect me from reality. I'm stronger than you think." Something broke in Adriano's carefully maintained control. He pulled her close, not roughly but with a desperation that spoke of deep need, burying his face in her hair and just holding her. Sofia wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his body, the way he was trembling slightly, as if fighting to maintain composure. They stood like that for several minutes, just breathing together, and Sofia felt something fundamental shift between them. This wasn't the man who'd saved her from the rain or the gentleman who'd kept a respectful distance. This was Adriano, stripped of all pretense, vulnerable and human, and needing comfort just as much as she had. "There's a man," Adriano said finally, his voice muffled against her hair. "Antonio Moretti. He runs trafficking operations, girls mostly, some of them barely teenagers. It's always existed in the shadows of my world, but there were rules, never kids, never force beyond a certain point. Moretti broke those rules. He's been taking girls off the streets, using them, destroying them." He pulled back to look at her, and the anguish in his eyes made her heart ache. "I have to stop him, Sofia. But stopping him means violence. It means blood. It means becoming the monster everyone thinks I am." Sofia cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to maintain eye contact. "You're not a monster," she said fiercely. "Monsters don't lose sleep over the things they have to do. Monsters don't create rules to protect the vulnerable. If you have to stop this Moretti, then you stop him. But that doesn't make you him. That makes you someone willing to do hard things to protect people who can't protect themselves. Like you, Adriano asked softly, his hands coming up to cover hers. Is that what I'm doing? Trying to save everyone because I saved you? Maybe, Sofia admitted. Or maybe you're just a better man than you give yourself credit for. You have power, Adriano. Real power. And you're choosing to use it to help rather than harm. That matters. That means something. Adriano kissed her then. A kiss that was both tender and desperate, filled with weeks of restrained wanting and the raw emotion of the moment. Sofia kissed him back without thinking, without the careful self-protection she'd maintained since arriving. It felt right in a way that terrified her. Like coming home to a place she'd never been. Like finding something she hadn't known she was looking for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adriano rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he said. The words simple and devastating. I know I shouldn't. I know it's too fast, too complicated. I know I'm dangerous and broken and everything you should run from, but I can't help it. You walked into my life collapsed and barely breathing, and somehow you've become the air I need to survive. Sofia felt tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Love. Real love. Not Marcus's twisted version that came with conditions and control, but something genuine and frightening in its intensity. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm so scared of this, of feeling this way, of needing someone again. Then be scared, Adriano said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. Be scared and stay anyway. Let me prove that love doesn't have to hurt. Let me show you what it means to be cherished. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a plea. I won't rush you, I won't push, but I need you to know how I feel. I need you to understand that you're not just some charity case I'm housing out of pity. You're everything, Sofia. You're the light that makes this dark world bearable. They stood in the library holding each other as the night deepened around them, two broken people finding unexpected wholeness in each other's arms. Sofia knew this was crazy, knew she should be more cautious, should protect herself better. But for the first time since Marcus, she felt alive. She felt seen and valued and loved in a way that made her believe in possibilities she'd thought were lost forever. Adriano was dangerous, that was undeniable. But he was also kind and brilliant and surprisingly gentle. He was complicated in ways she was only beginning to understand. But so was she. Maybe that was the point. Maybe fate had brought her to his gates, not just for rescue, but for something deeper. Something neither of them had seen coming. Stay with me tonight, Adriano said, and it wasn't a demand but a request, vulnerable and hopeful. Just sleep. I just want to hold you. Sofia nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. They went upstairs together, to Adriano's suite, a massive room she'd never seen before that somehow managed to be both masculine and comfortable. He gave her one of his shirts to sleep in, and Sofia changed in the bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror and barely recognizing the woman looking back. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed, and despite the tears, she looked happy, genuinely happy. When she emerged, Adriano was already in bed. The covers pulled back in invitation. Sofia slid in beside him, and he immediately pulled her close, her back to his chest, his arms secure around her waist. Thank you, he murmured into her hair, for seeing me. The real me, not just the reputation or the power. Thank you for staying. Thank you for finding me, Sofia whispered back. For carrying me inside when you could have just called for help and walked away, for giving me a reason to believe in kindness again. They fell asleep like that, two damaged souls finding shelter in each other, unaware that the world outside those walls was about to test the strength of what they'd built in ways neither could have anticipated. The meeting with Moretti happened 3 days later, and Adriano wouldn't let Sofia anywhere near it. She spent the day with Rosa, trying to keep busy, but anxiety gnawed at her with sharp teeth. She'd understood intellectually that Adriano lived in a dangerous world, but knowing it and facing the reality of him walking into potential violence were very different things. When evening fell and he still hadn't returned, Sofia found herself pacing the library, jumping at every sound, imagining worst-case scenarios that made her stomach churn. It was nearly midnight when she heard the front door open. Sofia rushed into the entrance hall and stopped short at the sight of Adriano. He was alive and apparently uninjured, but there was blood on his shirt, his knuckles were bruised and split, and his eyes held a hardness she'd never seen before. Giuseppe was with him, talking in low tones, but Adriano cut him off when he saw Sofia. "Not now," he said to Giuseppe, his voice empty of emotion. "We'll discuss it tomorrow." He moved toward Sofia, and she saw him trying to shift, trying to soften the dangerous man who'd just returned into the one she knew. But the transformation was incomplete. This was Adriano Rossi in his element, the man who controlled the city's underworld, and he was terrifying. Sofia did the only thing she could think of. She closed the distance between them and took his damaged hands in hers, examining the torn skin and bruised bones with gentle fingers. "Let me clean these," she said softly, refusing to show fear even though her heart was racing. "Come on." She led him to his suite's bathroom and made him sit on the edge of the bathtub while she gathered first aid supplies. Adriano watched her with that hard, empty expression as she cleaned his knuckles with antiseptic, as she bandaged the worst of the cuts, as she worked with steady hands despite the trembling she felt inside. She didn't ask what had happened, didn't demand explanations. She just took care of him, the way he'd taken care of her when she'd needed it. "You should be afraid of me," Adriano said finally, his voice rough. "You should be running right now, getting as far from me as possible." Sofia finished wrapping his left hand before meeting his eyes. "Is Moretti still hurting those girls?" she asked. "No," Adriano said flatly. "He'll never hurt anyone again." Sofia nodded slowly, processing what that meant. The finality of it. She should be horrified, should be questioning her choices, but instead she felt only a grim satisfaction. Those girls were safe now. They'd go home to their families or find new lives, free from the nightmare Moretti had created. "Then I'm not afraid," she said. "You did what needed to be done." "You don't understand what I'm capable of," Adriano said, grabbing her wrist, not hard enough to hurt but firm enough to stop her movement. "The things I've done, the people I've hurt, you can't just accept that. You can't just love that." "I'm not accepting violence, Adriano. I'm accepting you." Sofia pulled her wrist free and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "I know you're not a good man by conventional standards. I know you do terrible things. But I also know you do them with rules and purpose. And I know that underneath all that hardness is someone who saved a stranger in the rain because it was the right thing to do. That's the man I'm falling in love with. Not the reputation, not the power, but the person underneath who is trying so hard to do the right thing in a world without many right choices." Adriano's control finally shattered. He pulled her onto his lap and kissed her with a desperation that stole her breath, his bandaged hands tangling in her hair as if she was the only thing keeping him tethered to humanity. Sofia kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring all her complicated feelings into the contact. Acceptance and fear and love and need all mixed together into something she couldn't name but felt with every fiber of her being. "I need you," Adriano gasped against her lips. "God help me. I need you so much it terrifies me." "Then have me," Sofia whispered, knowing they were crossing a line but unable to stop, unwilling to deny either of them what they both desperately wanted. "I'm here. I'm staying. I'm yours." They made love with an urgency born of fear and relief, of finally admitting feelings too large to contain, of finding connection in a world that had tried so hard to break them both. Adriano was tender despite his need, checking constantly that she was okay, that he wasn't hurting her, that she wanted this as much as he did. Sofia had never felt so cherished, so seen, so absolutely certain that this was right, even when logic said it should be wrong. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, breathing in sync as the adrenaline slowly faded. Adriano traced patterns on her back with his fingertips, his touch reverent and possessive at the same time. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he said quietly. "Not Marcus, not my enemies, not anyone. You're mine to protect now." "And you're mine to protect," Sofia countered, propping herself up to look at him. "This goes both ways, Adriano. You don't get to shoulder everything alone anymore. Let me be your safe place, the way you've been mine." Adriano smiled, and it was genuine and warm and full of something that looked a lot like hope. "Deal," he said, pulling her down for a kiss that was slow and sweet and perfect. "But fair warning, I'm terrible at letting people help me. You'll have to be patient." "I can do patient," Sofia said, settling against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I've got time. We've got time." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, and for the first time in longer than either could remember, neither had nightmares. The world outside might be dangerous and complicated, but in that room, in that moment, they were safe. They'd found each other against all odds, two lost souls who'd stumbled into something neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Morning brought new challenges. Marcus had apparently been searching for Sofia, showing up at her old job, calling friends she hadn't spoken to in months, making threats that worried the people who heard them. Giuseppe brought this information to Adriano over breakfast, his expression carefully neutral as he glanced between his boss and Sofia, clearly aware that something fundamental had shifted between them overnight. He filed a missing persons report, Giuseppe said, sliding a folder across the table. Claims Sofia is mentally unstable and needs to be found for her own safety. He's playing the concerned boyfriend angle hard. Sofia felt ice in her veins. Of course Marcus would do this. Of course he'd try to use the system to drag her back under his control. "I'm not going back," she said firmly, though her hands trembled around her coffee cup. "I don't care what he says or does. I'm not going back to him." "You won't have to," Adriano said, his voice carrying the cold certainty that meant he'd already made a decision. "Giuseppe, find out where Marcus is staying. I'll handle this personally." "No," Sofia said sharply, surprising them both. "You're not going to hurt him. I know you want to, and God knows he deserves it, but that's not the answer. That just makes me the reason you committed violence, and I can't live with that." Adriano's jaw tightened, clearly struggling with the desire to eliminate a threat versus respecting her wishes. "Then what do you suggest?" "Because I'm not letting him anywhere near you." Sofia thought for a moment, an idea forming. "Let me talk to him. In public, with your people nearby for safety. Let me tell him face to face that I'm done, that I'm filing for a restraining order, that if he doesn't leave me alone, I'll press charges for assault. Give him one chance to walk away." "And if he doesn't take it?" Adriano asked. "Then you do what you need to do," Sofia said quietly. "But let me try this first. Let me take back some of the power he stole from me." Adriano studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Okay, but we do this my way. Controlled environment, multiple exit strategies, and at the first sign of him getting aggressive, my people pull you out. Agreed?" "Agreed," Sofia said, relief washing over her. She knew Adriano was compromising his instincts to honor her wishes, and that meant more than any grand gesture could have. The meeting was set up for 3 days later at a cafe in the city center, public enough to be safe but private enough for a real conversation. Sofia spent those days preparing mentally, working with Rosa to craft exactly what she wanted to say, how she wanted to present herself. She wouldn't go to Marcus as a victim. She'd go as someone who'd found her strength again, someone who'd remembered her worth. Adriano was a nervous wreck, though he tried to hide it. He insisted on buying her a new outfit for the meeting, something that made her feel confident and powerful. The deep blue dress he chose was perfect, elegant without being flashy, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her height and made her feel like she could face anything. The morning of the meeting, Adriano kissed her like he was memorizing the feel of her lips, his hands gentle on her face. "You don't have to do this," he said one last time. "Say the word and I'll make him disappear. You'll never have to think about him again." "I need to do this," Sofia said. "For me. I need to look him in the eye and show him that he didn't break me," she smiled, trying to look more confident than she felt. "Besides, I have you. What could he possibly do to me that's scarier than falling in love with a mafia boss?" That got a surprised laugh from Adriano, breaking the tension. "Fair point. But for the record, I'm much scarier than him, and I'm completely devoted to you, which makes me even more dangerous to anyone who tries to hurt you." Sofia kissed him once more, drawing strength from his presence. "I know. That's what makes me brave enough to do this. Now let's go before I lose my nerve." The cafe was exactly as Giuseppe had described it, large windows that made it impossible for Marcus to corner her, multiple exits, and several of Adriano's men positioned at strategic locations, pretending to be regular customers. Adriano himself sat 3 tables away, his back to her but his attention fully focused on what was about to happen. Sofia could feel his presence like a warm shield, giving her courage as she watched Marcus walk through the door. He looked different than she remembered, smaller somehow, less imposing. Or maybe she was different, no longer the cowering woman who'd measured her words to avoid his temper. Marcus spotted her and his face went through several emotions: relief, anger, possessiveness, before settling on concern that looked fake, even from across the room. He approached her table with the careful movements of someone approaching a skittish animal. "Sofia, baby, thank God," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled it back, keeping her hands in her lap. The flash of anger that crossed his face was quickly suppressed, replaced by wounded confusion. "I've been so worried. Why did you run? What happened?" "You happened, Marcus," Sofia said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "You happened over and over again for 2 years, and I'm done." She watched him carefully, seeing the moment he realized this wasn't going to be the easy reconciliation he'd expected. "Done?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get to be done, Sofia. We're together. We live together. You can't just disappear because we had a little fight." He leaned forward, lowering his voice to that dangerous tone she knew too well. "Come home, now, before you make this worse for yourself." "I'm not coming home," Sofia said clearly. "I'm filing a restraining order against you. If you come near me again, I'll press charges for assault. I have photographs of the bruises you left. I have a lawyer. I have protection. You don't control me anymore." Marcus's face darkened with rage. "Protection? What, you found some new guy to leech off of?" "That didn't take long. What did you do? Sleep with the first man who showed you attention?" His voice was rising, drawing looks from other patrons. "You're pathetic, Sofia. Nobody wants you except me. Nobody will put up with your neediness and your weakness. You'll come crawling back within a week." Sofia felt a surge of anger override her fear. She stood, looking down at him with something that felt like pity. "You're wrong. I'm stronger than you ever let me believe. I'm smarter than you convinced me I was. And I'm worth more than you told me every single day. I don't need you, Marcus. I never did. I just needed to remember that I could survive without you." She picked up her purse, preparing to leave. "Goodbye. If you're smart, you'll move on with your life and leave me alone. If you're not, you'll find out exactly what kind of protection I have now." She turned to walk away, and Marcus grabbed her arm hard enough to hurt. "You don't walk away from me," he snarled. "I own you." "Remove your hand," a cold voice said from behind him. Adriano had materialized like smoke, his presence suddenly filling the space, making Marcus look even smaller by comparison. "Now." Marcus looked up at Adriano, and whatever he saw in those dark eyes made him release Sofia's arm immediately. He stumbled back, finally registering the several large men who were now standing casually nearby, all watching him with predatory focus. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus demanded. But his voice had lost its confidence. "I'm the man who answers to no one," Adriano said quietly, each word precise and deadly. "I'm the man who doesn't tolerate people who hurt women. And I'm the man telling you that if you ever contact Sofia again, if you ever so much as think about her, I will make you regret the day you were born. Do we understand each other?" Marcus tried to stare him down and failed miserably. Something in Adriano's face, maybe the absolute certainty that he would follow through on his threat, made Marcus back toward the door. "She's not worth it," he muttered, trying to save face. "Keep her. She's damaged goods anyway." He left quickly, and Sofia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her knees felt weak, but she was also filled with an overwhelming sense of victory. She'd done it. She'd faced Marcus and come out the other side. She'd taken back her power, her voice, her agency. Adriano's arm came around her waist, steady and supportive. "You were magnificent," he murmured in her ear. "So strong. I'm so proud of you." Sofia turned into his embrace, not caring who saw, not caring about propriety or public displays. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said against his chest. "Knowing you were here, knowing you had my back, that made all the difference." Always, Adriano promised. For as long as you'll have me, I'll always have your back. They left the cafe together, Adriano's men forming a loose perimeter around them, and Sofia felt something settle deep in her soul. She was free. Really, truly free for the first time in years. Free from Marcus's control. Free from the fear that had defined her life. Free to choose her own path forward. And she was choosing Adriano, choosing this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly wonderful man who'd given her back to herself. The months that followed were the happiest of Sofia's life. She moved officially into Adriano's suite, their lives intertwining in ways both practical and profound. She started painting again, and Adriano converted one of the mansion's spare rooms into a studio for her, outfitted with the best supplies money could buy. Her work transformed from tentative studies to bold, confident pieces that surprised them both with their power. Adriano hung her paintings throughout the mansion, declaring them better than half the expensive art he'd inherited. Sofia learned more about Adriano's world, not the violent details, but the structure of it, the network of people who depended on him for protection and livelihood. She understood now that he was more than just a criminal. He was a leader, someone who maintained order in places the law couldn't reach, who protected the vulnerable even as he operated outside societal rules. It was complicated and morally gray, but so was everything in life when you looked closely enough. They traveled together, quick trips to cities where Adriano had business, and Sofia got to see the world beyond the small bubble she'd lived in with Marcus. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. Each city a revelation, each experience colored by Adriano's knowledge and passion. He showed her art galleries and hidden restaurants, taught her phrases in Italian, and made her laugh with stories of his misspent youth. They made love in hotel rooms with views of ancient architecture and in their own bed with Rose's disapproving tut when they missed breakfast yet again. But there were still shadows. Marcus hadn't contacted her directly, but Giuseppe reported that he was making noise around the city, telling anyone who'd listen that Sofia had been kidnapped, that she was being held against her will by a dangerous criminal. Most people ignored him, recognizing the ramblings of a man who'd lost control of something he'd considered his property. But some listened, and whispers began to circulate about Adriano Rossi's mysterious new woman. Speculation about who she was and why the notoriously private crime boss had suddenly become so visible with a partner. The real problem came from within Adriano's world. Not everyone was happy about Sofia's presence. Some of the older members of his organization thought she was a distraction, a weakness that enemies could exploit. Others worried she'd make Adriano soft, less willing to make the hard decisions that had kept them all safe and prosperous. There were murmurs of discontent that Giuseppe reported with increasing frequency, suggestions that Adriano was losing his edge. It all came to a head on a night in late autumn. Sofia had been in her studio working on a new piece when she heard shouting from downstairs. She rushed to the landing and found Adriano in the entrance hall with 3 men she didn't recognize. All of them armed, all of them looking angry and desperate. Giuseppe lay on the floor, blood spreading from a wound in his shoulder, and Rosa was nowhere to be seen. "There she is," one of the men said, his gun swinging toward Sofia. "The reason you've gone weak, boss? Time to show her what your world is really like." Adriano moved faster than Sofia had ever seen him move, putting himself between her and the guns, his own weapon appearing as if from nowhere. "You point that gun anywhere near her again and you're dead before you hit the ground," he said, his voice like ice. "Explain what this is about quickly, before I lose what little patience I have left." "This is about you choosing her over the family," the man said. His name was Lorenzo, Sofia remembered, one of Adriano's lieutenants. "This is about you turning soft when we need you to be strong. The Morettis are making moves, the Santoros are testing our borders, and you're too busy playing house to notice. We need the old you back, the one who put business first. And you think threatening the woman I love will make me more reasonable?" Adriano's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You're even stupider than I thought, Lorenzo. Giuseppe?" He glanced at his wounded security chief, who was struggling to sit up. "I'm okay, boss," Giuseppe gritted out. "They got the drop on me. Won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," Adriano said, his eyes never leaving Lorenzo and his companions. Now let me explain something to you three very carefully. Sofia is not a weakness. She's the only reason I'm still sane in this insane world. She's not making me soft. She's making me human. And I'm better at my job, better at protecting all of you when I have something worth protecting. His gun remained steady, pointed at Lorenzo's chest. But since you've threatened her, since you've shown me that you value your own interpretation of strength over loyalty, you've forced my hand. The next few seconds happened so fast Sofia could barely track them. One of Lorenzo's men moved, gun rising, and Adriano fired twice. The man went down, his weapon clattering across the marble floor. Lorenzo and the third man froze, finally understanding that they'd miscalculated badly. Giuseppe, despite his wound, had retrieved his own weapon and had it trained on the third man. "Drop your guns," Adriano ordered, his voice deadly calm. "Now!" They complied, the weapons hitting the floor with dull thuds. Adriano kicked them away, then stepped closer to Lorenzo. "I have been more than fair to you. I have paid you well, protected your family, given you opportunities to advance. And this is how you repay me, by threatening the woman I love?" He backhanded Lorenzo hard enough that the man staggered. "Get out, all of you, you're done. Out of my organization, out of my city. If I see your face again, I'll kill you. Understood?" Lorenzo and his remaining companions scrambled for the door, leaving their wounded comrade behind. As soon as they were gone, Adriano turned to the man on the floor, checking his wound with professional efficiency. "You'll live," he said coldly. "Giuseppe, have someone take him to Dr. Castellano, then dump him at the city limits." He finally holstered his weapon and turned to Sofia, who stood frozen on the stairs. "Are you okay?" Sofia nodded, though she was shaking. The reality of Adriano's world had just crashed into her safe bubble with terrifying force. She'd known intellectually what he was, but seeing the violence and the cold calculation, was different. Yet as he climbed the stairs toward her, as she saw the concern in his eyes, warring with the hardness that had kept them both alive, she realized something important. She wasn't afraid of him, she was afraid for him. "I'm sorry," Adriano said, reaching for her hands. "I'm so sorry you had to see that. I never wanted this world to touch you." "But it's your world," Sofia said, finding her voice. "And I chose to be part of it. I chose you, knowing what that meant." She squeezed his hands, feeling them tremble slightly. "Are you okay? You just had to hurt someone for me." "I'd burn down the entire city for you," Adriano said simply. "Those men threatened you. They made their choice. I made mine." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "But maybe you should reconsider this. Maybe I was wrong to bring you into this. You deserve better than looking over your shoulder, better than men with guns showing up at your home." Sofia pulled back to look at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath the hardness. The man who was terrified of losing her, but willing to let her go if that's what kept her safe. "I collapsed outside your gates in the rain," she said softly. "I had nothing, no one, nowhere to go. You carried me inside and gave me everything: safety, healing, purpose, love. Do you really think I'm going to walk away now because your world is dangerous? Adriano, my old world almost killed me. At least in your world. I have someone who will fight for me." "You have someone who will fight for you in any world," Adriano said fiercely. "But Sofia, this won't be the last time. There will be other challenges, other dangers. Being with me means accepting that." "Then I accept it," Sofia said, without hesitation. "I'm not some delicate flower that needs to be protected from reality. I'm a woman who survived her own hell and came out stronger. Your world doesn't scare me. Losing you does." She stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her certainty into the contact. "We're in this together, remember? For better or worse, in danger and in safety. That's what love means." Adriano kissed her back with desperate intensity, and Sofia felt the last walls between them crumble. They were fully exposed to each other now. All pretense gone, just two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and were choosing to hold on despite everything trying to pull them apart. The weeks following the attack were tense but transformative. Adriano consolidated his power, making it clear that Sofia was untouchable, that anyone who threatened her would face consequences that made Lorenzo's exile look merciful. Word spread quickly through the underworld. Adriano Rossi had found someone worth protecting, and that made him more dangerous than ever, not less. Because now he had something to lose, which meant he'd be utterly ruthless in protecting it. Sofia threw herself into her art with new passion, creating pieces that captured the complexity of their life together, beauty and darkness intertwined, strength born from vulnerability. A gallery owner who rose anew saw her work and begged to represent her. Within months, Sofia had her first show, paintings that commanded prices she'd never dreamed of, critics calling her bold and unflinching in her vision. Adriano attended her opening night in a suit that probably cost more than the average car, looking every inch the dangerous man he was, and spent the entire evening gazing at her with such obvious adoration that it became part of the show itself. People whispered about them, the mysterious Sofia Mendes and her powerful patron. But Sofia didn't care. She had found her voice again, her strength, her purpose. And she had found love with a man who saw all of her, the broken parts and the healing parts and the fierce parts, and loved her anyway. On a cool spring evening, exactly 1 year after the night she'd collapsed at his gates, Adriano took Sofia back to that spot. The gates stood open now, welcoming rather than forbidding, and he led her to the exact place where Giuseppe had found her unconscious in the rain. "Do you remember?" Adriano asked softly, his arm around her waist as they looked at the unremarkable patch of ground that had changed everything. "I remember being so tired," Sofia said. "So lost. I thought I was dying, and part of me was okay with that, because at least it would be over." She leaned into him, drawing warmth from his presence. "I never imagined that falling here would lead to finding everything I needed." "Fate," Adriano said, the word carrying weight. "I didn't believe in it before you. I thought life was just chaos and power and survival. But you collapsed at my gates. Sofia, out of all the places in this city you could have ended up, you ended up here, and I happened to be home. Giuseppe happened to check the cameras. I happened to care enough to bring you inside." He turned her to face him, his dark eyes intense with emotion. "That's not coincidence. That's fate." Sofia felt tears prickling her eyes, the good kind. The kind that came from overwhelming happiness rather than pain. "So what are you saying?" Adriano dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box from his pocket, and Sofia's breath caught. "I'm saying that fate brought you to me, and I'm not fool enough to let you go. I'm saying that you're the best thing that ever happened to me, the light in my darkness, the reason I keep fighting to be better. I'm saying I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the light, elegant and perfect. "Sofia Mendes, will you marry me? Will you choose this life, this complicated, dangerous, beautiful life with me?" Sofia laughed through her tears, dropping to her knees in front of him, not caring about the dress or the ground or anything except the man looking at her with his heart in his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "Yes, I'll marry you. I choose you, Adriano. I choose us." He slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything between them. Two broken pieces that somehow made a perfect whole. They kissed there at the gates where their story had begun, and Sofia felt the last remnants of her old fears dissolve. She wasn't the woman who'd collapsed in the rain anymore. She was Sofia Mendes, artist, survivor, and soon-to-be wife to the most dangerous and devoted man she'd ever known. As they walked back to the mansion hand in hand, the gates closing behind them, Sofia looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the evening sky. She thought about the twisting path that had led her here, the pain and fear that had driven her into the storm, the exhaustion that had dropped her at these particular gates. If she could go back and tell that broken woman lying in the rain what was coming, she wouldn't believe it. She wouldn't believe that salvation could come from such an unlikely source, that love could grow in such dangerous soil, that she could find home in the arms of a man whose world lived in shadows. But life was strange and surprising, and sometimes, just sometimes, it gave you exactly what you needed when you'd lost all hope of finding it. Sofia had collapsed outside Adriano Rossi's mansion, expecting nothing. and he'd carried her inside and given her everything. He'd given her safety and healing, purpose and passion, and a love so fierce and true that it made all the darkness worthwhile. They stood together on the mansion's steps, looking out at the grounds that had become home, at the life they'd built from broken pieces and desperate chances. Adriano pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple, and Sofia felt complete in a way she'd never thought possible. Ready to go inside, soon to be Mrs. Rossi, Adriano murmured against her hair. Sofia smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep happiness, the kind she'd thought she'd forgotten how to make. Always, she said, as long as I'm with you, I'm ready for anything. And as they crossed the threshold together into warmth and light, into the future they'd build side by side, Sofia knew with absolute certainty that collapsing outside those gates had been the luckiest fall of her life, because it had led her straight into the arms of the man who would spend the rest of his days making sure she never fell alone again. Remained calm, thoughtful, as if he was considering how to answer a very good question. I don't know, he said finally, and the honesty in his voice surprised her more than a lie would have. Giuseppe, my head of security, saw you on the cameras. He thought you looked like someone running from something, and I couldn't leave you there. Call it instinct. His eyes dropped to her wrist, where the bruises Marcus had left were now a livid purple against her pale skin. Someone hurt you. It wasn't a question, and Sofia found herself reflexively pulling her arm closer to her body, hiding the evidence of her failure to escape sooner. I don't want to talk about it, she said, her voice gaining strength even as tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. I just need to leave. I appreciate your help, but I should go. She started to push the blankets away, and this time Adriano did touch her, his hand gentle on her arm, stopping her movement without force. Sofia, he said, and she froze. How did he know her name? Her confusion must have shown on her face because he gestured to the nightstand. Her wallet sat there, open to her driver's license. I needed to know who you were, in case you needed specific medical care. I haven't touched anything else. He released her arm and leaned back. And I'm afraid I can't let you leave. Not yet. The words sent ice through her veins. This was it. This was where the kindness turned into something else. Where the prince became the monster. She'd seen this story before, lived it for 2 years. What do you mean you can't let me leave? Her voice shook despite her best efforts to sound brave. You can't keep me here. I'll scream. I'll call the police. Adriano's expression shifted, hurt flashing across his features before being replaced by understanding. I'm not trying to imprison you, Sofia. Please, let me explain. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. You're malnourished, dehydrated, and you were minutes away from serious hypothermia when I found you. Dr. E. Castellanos said you need rest and proper care. If you leave now in your condition, you'll end up right back where you were, collapse somewhere, maybe somewhere without people to help you. I'm asking you to stay, just for a few days, until you're stronger. I don't have a few days, Sofia said, desperation creeping into her voice. I don't have anything. I left everything behind. I can't impose on you like this. You don't understand. How could she explain to someone like him? Someone who lived in a mansion and wore suits that cost more than her entire wardrobe. What it meant to have nothing, to be nothing. Marcus had spent 2 years making sure she understood her worthlessness. And right now, sitting in this beautiful room, accepting charity from a stranger, she felt every word of it. Adriano was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When he spoke again, his voice held a quality she couldn't quite identify, something old and painful and carefully controlled. I understand more than you think. I wasn't always this. He gestured vaguely at the room, at the wealth surrounding them. I grew up in a place where every day was survival. I know what it's like to have nothing, to feel like you're drowning and no one cares enough to pull you up. I can't explain why, but when Giuseppe showed me you on those cameras, something told me I was supposed to help, that maybe, just maybe, fate had put you outside my gates for a reason. Fate, Sofia repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Fate has been pretty cruel to me so far. Why would it suddenly decide to be kind? But even as she said it, she felt her resistance weakening. She was so tired, bone-tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. The thought of going back out into the world right now, of figuring out her next move with no money and no plan, was overwhelming. And there was something about Adriano, something in the way he looked at her like she mattered, like she was a person worth saving. That made her want to believe him. "Stay," Adriano said. And it wasn't a command, but a request, gentle and sincere. "Just for a few days. Let Rosa, my housekeeper, take care of you. Eat proper meals, rest, recover your strength. Then, if you still want to leave, I'll help you. I'll give you money, help you find a safe place to stay, whatever you need. But don't go out there like this. Please." He leaned forward, his eyes intense and compelling. "Let me help you, Sofia. You don't have to do this alone." The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks in hot trails that she couldn't stop. When was the last time someone had offered to help her without expecting something in return? When was the last time someone had looked at her with genuine concern, rather than calculation or contempt? Marcus had isolated her so completely from friends and family that she'd forgotten what kindness without strings felt like. She knew she should be suspicious, should protect herself, but she was so tired of being strong all by herself. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible. "A few days, but then I leave." She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, feeling foolish and vulnerable and strangely relieved all at once. Adriano's expression softened in a way that transformed his face, making him look younger and less dangerous. He reached over to the nightstand and handed her a tissue, his movements careful and unthreatening. "A few days," he agreed. "Now, let me have Rosa bring you something to eat. You must be starving." He stood tall and imposing even with that softness in his eyes, and moved toward the door. But he paused before leaving, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're safe here, Sofia. I give you my word. No one will hurt you again." The certainty in his voice sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. As he closed the door behind him, leaving her alone in the beautiful room, Sofia lay back against the pillows and tried to process everything that had happened. She'd run from one dangerous situation straight into the arms of, what? A good Samaritan? A wealthy man with a savior complex? Or something more complicated than either of those simple explanations? She didn't know Adriano Rossi, didn't know what he did for a living or why he had security cameras and a private doctor on call. But something in her gut told her she could trust him. That scared her more than anything else, because the last time she'd trusted her gut about a man, she'd ended up with Marcus. And 2 years later, she was lying in a stranger's guest room, with bruises on her wrist and no idea what came next. But as exhaustion pulled at her again, as the safety and warmth of the bed wrapped around her like a cocoon, Sofia let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe Adriano was right. Maybe fate had brought her to those gates for a reason. Maybe, just maybe, not all men were monsters. She fell asleep with that fragile hope cradled close to her heart, unaware that downstairs, Adriano Rossi was making phone calls that would ensure her ex could never hurt her again. His voice cold and commanding as he deployed resources that most people didn't know existed. Because when Adriano Rossi decided to protect something, he did it with the full force of an empire built on power and controlled violence. And Sofia Mendes, the woman who'd collapsed outside his gates in the rain, had somehow become the most important thing in his world to protect. The next 3 days passed in a blur of rest, good food, and the kind of care Sofia had almost forgotten existed. Rosa, a motherly woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, treated her like a daughter, bringing meals at regular intervals and sitting with her while she ate, making sure she finished every bite. The food was nothing like Sofia had expected. Not fancy restaurant dishes, but simple, nourishing meals that warmed her from the inside out. Homemade soup with fresh bread, pasta with vegetables, fruit smoothies that Rosa claimed were full of vitamins she desperately needed. Each meal was an act of love, and Sofia found herself eating more than she had in months, her body slowly remembering what it felt like to be properly fed. Adriano visited her twice a day, once in the morning and once in the evening. Never staying long, but always present, a steady constant in the strange new reality she found herself inhabiting. He brought her books from his library, thick novels and poetry collections that she devoured with the hunger of someone who'd been denied simple pleasures for too long. Marcus had hated when she read, said it was a waste of time, that she should be focused on him and his needs. Having unlimited access to books again felt like breathing after being underwater. They talked during these visits, careful conversations that circled around the important things neither was ready to address. Adriano told her about the mansion's history, how it had belonged to his mentor before passing to him, about the gardens that Rosa tended with obsessive care, about the city beyond the gates and its complex web of power and politics. He was intelligent and well-read, able to discuss literature and philosophy with the ease of someone who'd spent years educating himself. But he never talked about his business, never explained the phone calls she sometimes heard through the walls, the serious-looking men who occasionally appeared at the mansion for meetings behind closed doors. Sofia, in turn, shared carefully edited pieces of her own story. She told him about growing up in a small town, about coming to the city for college and staying because there was nothing to go back to. She told him about her love of painting, a hobby she'd abandoned when Marcus had thrown away her supplies during one of his rages. She told him about the job she'd lost 3 months ago, when Marcus had shown up at her workplace, causing a scene. About the slow erosion of her independence until she'd had nothing left but the clothes on her back. But she didn't tell him about the worst of it. About the nights she'd locked herself in the bathroom while Marcus raged outside. About the friends she'd lost because he'd convinced her they were all against her. About the self-loathing that had become her constant companion. On the 4th morning, Sofia woke feeling stronger than she had in months. The exhaustion that had been her baseline for so long had receded, replaced by something that felt almost like energy. She showered in the suite's massive bathroom, using the expensive products Rosa had provided, and dressed in clothes that had appeared in the closet, simple but well-made pieces in her size. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The haunted look in her eyes had softened, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. She looked alive again. Rosa appeared with breakfast, but this time with an invitation. "Mr. Rossi requests your presence in the garden. If you're feeling up to it," she said, her eyes twinkling with something that looked like matchmaking approval. "It's a beautiful day, and he thought you might enjoy some fresh air." Sofia found Adriano in what Rosa called the East Garden, a private space surrounded by high stone walls, covered in climbing roses. He stood near a fountain, his back to her, hands in his pockets, as he stared at the water. He'd traded his usual formal suits for dark slacks and a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up. And Sofia was struck by how different he looked, more relaxed, more human. The morning sun caught the dark waves of his hair, and she noticed for the first time that there were threads of silver at his temples, aging him beyond what she'd initially thought. "It's beautiful," she said, announcing her presence. Adriano turned, and the smile that crossed his face when he saw her was genuine and warm, transforming his usually stern features into something that made her heart skip in a way she wasn't ready to examine. "You look better," he said, gesturing for her to join him. "Rosa told me you've been eating well. I'm glad." They walked together along the garden paths, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Adriano continued after a moment. "You said you'd stay for a few days, and it's been 4. I want you to know that you're welcome to stay longer, as long as you need, actually." Sofia stopped walking, turning to face him. "Why are you doing this? And don't say you don't know. There has to be a reason." She studied his face, looking for the angle, the expectation, the price that would eventually come due. People don't just help strangers out of the goodness of their hearts, especially not people like you. "People like me," Adriano repeated, something dark flickering across his expression. "And what kind of person do you think I am?" "Sofia." There was no anger in his voice, just curiosity and perhaps a hint of resignation, as if he was used to being judged and found wanting. Sofia chose her words carefully. "Rich, powerful, the kind of man who has private security and doctors on call in the middle of the night. The kind of man who makes phone calls and people jump. I'm not stupid, Adriano. I know you're not some ordinary businessman." She paused, gathering her courage. "I need to know what I'm getting into here. What do you want from me?" Adriano was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if looking for something he needed to find. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense, each word carefully chosen. "You're right, I'm not an ordinary businessman. I operate in places most people prefer to pretend don't exist, doing things that keep certain aspects of this city running smoothly. I won't lie to you and pretend I'm a saint. But I have rules, Sofia. Lines I don't cross. And one of those lines is hurting people who can't fight back." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. "When I saw you collapsed at my gates, when I saw those bruises on your wrist, something in me recognized something in you. Survival. Strength. The kind of strength it takes to keep going when everything in you wants to quit." "That's not an answer to my question," Sofia said, but her voice had lost its edge. She wanted to be angry, wanted to maintain her suspicion, but the sincerity in his eyes was making it difficult. "What do I want from you?" Adriano reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her cheek with his fingertips. The contact sent electricity through her body, a response she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten it existed. "I want you to be safe. I want you to remember that you have value, that you deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. I want to see you smile without that shadow in your eyes that says you're expecting the worst." His hand dropped back to his side. "And selfishly, I want you to stay, because having you here has reminded me that there's more to life than business and strategy and the endless chess game of power. You make me remember what it's like to be human." The words hung between them, raw and honest in a way that Sofia hadn't expected. She could see the truth in his face, the vulnerability he was offering her despite clearly being someone who rarely let his guard down. It terrified her, this connection she felt building between them, because she'd sworn she'd never let another man close again. But Adriano wasn't Marcus. Everything about him was different, from the way he spoke to her as an equal to the careful way he respected her boundaries, never pushing, always asking. "I don't know how to do this," Sofia admitted, her voice small. "I don't know how to trust again. Marcus, he broke something in me, and I'm scared that if I stay, if I let myself believe this is real, I'll just end up hurt again." Adriano's expression,